love that woman right there? You love her, right? Yes, sir?
Yes, sir.
Now, you're not an adult till you're 18. Do you want me to be your daddy for the next 8 years, son? Huh?
Yes, sir.
You do? Why you want me to be your daddy?
I have no daddy.
You have no daddy? Well, let me tell you something. Come here, give me a hug.
You're listening to the King's Hall podcast, making self-ruled men who rule well and win the world. Well, gentlemen, welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of the King's Hall podcast. I'm not really sure, Dan, how you begin the show on a chipper note after that clip, which always gets me.
You got to give us a minute here, Eric.
Yeah.
What is it about that clip?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting when you watch it because it's from Jenny Jones.
Yeah, very classy TV programming from
yeah,
the
from
90s.
the 90s. Yeah,
Jenny
and
Jones.
so it was a whole shtick that she had where it was like drill sergeant shaming like middle school aged boys
Yeah.
into behaving for their single moms, you know, and so it really is tough to watch.
It's interesting if you watch the video, we would encourage people to do that. I just found it on YouTube, but the drill sergeant's face when the kid said, "Yes, sir, I do," like he was, they started cheering. The crowd did, the audience, and he was like, he looked like he was going to cry, and then he's, well, why? And the kid's about to cry too. I have no daddy. I think it's particularly moving too when you think about this, because in America, how many people are in that situation where they're saying essentially the same thing? I have no daddy. Right? It seems to be something that resonates with a lot of people. And when you look at our culture, there's a desperation about this situation as well. So current data as of 2021 indicates that roughly 18.3 million children live without a father in the home, which is roughly 25% of all children in America. That's a high number.
It's unbelievable.
There's a lot of fatherlessness. That number jumps up to 35% when looking only at adolescents. So as kids get older, it seems like parents are more likely to divorce, and that affects teenagers. As you know, teenagers, that's going to be a huge demographic that sets the tone for the next generation. So compare those numbers to 1950, in which just 6% of children lived in fatherless homes. Clearly, fatherlessness has drastically increased and been a problem. Something happened, as we'll see in this episode, in the 50s and then in the 1960s. But I think, gentlemen, that reality of fatherlessness actually goes beyond just physical absenteeism. Many more fathers, though present, abdicate their authority and responsibilities and may nonetheless neglect to have a meaningful role in their children's lives. So you have certain things like workaholism, dads who are just negligent or not there. But whatever the case, we have uninitiated men who are clueless about what their responsibility is as men going into adulthood. And our friend Michael Foster has called this sort of phenomenon the clueless bastardization, I guess, of our culture. So you can also look at a few other numbers, which we'll do, and then I want to ask you guys a question. One of the things that we look at is birth rates. They continue to plummet, meaning there will be fewer and fewer fathers in the future. So since about 2007, the U.S. birth rate has fallen by 20%.
20%?
20%. And
Since 2007.
I remember 2007.
Yeah.
It's not that long ago.
My truck is
Clearly.
older than 2007.
My car is from a different millennium.
It's also pink.
It wasn't always, though.
Which
It's
is,
like
I
faded
apologize.
cherry red, but also. Yes. So drastic numbers. Two of the major events, by the way. Why 2007? There's also a huge drop-off in 2020. So 2008, the economic crash, that made people want to have children less and less.
Yeah.
And then 2020, we don't have all the data, but birth rates are absolutely tanking even more because people are saying, well, look at inflation.
Yeah.
Myocarditis, the vaccine.
We just got canceled.
We just got
Come on,
canceled.
Eric.
Yeah.
Plus, with plummeting fertility rates.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's the other thing that I want to talk about. You've got millennials increasingly rejecting parenthood, and because of the current hormonal health crisis that is afflicting, Brian, both men and women, we've talked about it on Bright Hearth and the Hard Men podcast, some studies have estimated that sperm count in men will be so low that by 2050, reproduction will become physically impossible. Maybe that's why we see these like womb labs, like grow a baby in a lab stuff on social media.
Trying to figure that out.
They're trying to
Companies.
figure this out.
Yep.
I've seen The Matrix,
Yes.
so I've seen that happen.
Well, it's weird.
It
'cause
goes nowhere good. Don't
No.
shoot the sun.
You know, the orcs. Same.
What is
thing.
wrong with
Don't
me?
shoot the sun.
Wow.
Into this desert cauldron of greed, distrust, and violence, some men rode alone. Men of action. Men who tried to shoot the sun down.
Some of us need some more father time. So for those biological fathers left in the mix, whoever's left in this matrix and this problematic world, traditional masculine roles for them continue to be attacked by the culture at large. This includes mainline churches. Fatherhood has fallen on hard times, and as a result, there is a greater hunger for authentic masculine fatherhood. That's kind of what we're driving at in season 2. This quote I want to read, which we also read in the cold open of the introduction, but I think it's so good, it's worth reading again. This comes from Fatherlessness in America, published in 1995 by David Blankenhorn, and he writes this. So this is 95. I think we've actually gotten worse.
Yeah.
The United States is becoming an increasingly fatherless society. A generation ago, an American child could reasonably expect to grow up with his or her father. Today, an American child can reasonably expect not to. Fatherlessness is now approaching a rough parity with fatherhood as a defining feature of American childhood. So, gentlemen, I want to just ask you guys right off the bat the question about fatherhood. Why is it so important? Again, we talked a little bit about this in the introduction, but as we tee this up, why is it so important that we address this issue for our country, for our churches, for our families? Why is fatherhood so important?
Well, I mean, in the introduction, I had said something about how the father is the most important authority in humanity. And I think that's true. I think the family itself is a foundational covenant structure of humanity. You know, we talked about that a lot in season 1. It is the support structure holding up all of human civilization, economics, politics, education, even giving your life purpose. You know, like waking up and getting out of bed has a lot to do with family. And so the purpose or the motivation to continue and work, to building grand structures, to making churches, all areas of life have families at its foundation. And the single biggest factor, the single greatest authority is the father. And the father, I think, is such a determining factor in the well-being of these family structures that I do believe it's the single most important authority in all of men.
We've actually seen that in studies too. I think it's something like in the mid 80 percentile. Like whatever the father does religiously, that's what the kids end up doing.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to just chart like a graph of influence versus number of people, you know, like a father has tremendous influence over a few people, whereas like a politician, it's inverse, right? You have little influence over a lot of people. And so a father has maximal influence over people, image bearers. And so if you're just to think about this as simply as possible, imagine the archetypal man that had a good father versus the archetypal man that had a bad father, or the archetypal woman who had a good father versus the archetypal woman who did not have a good father. And so I think that authority is the most important human authority in shaping and directing entire cultures and times of people.
Yeah. And you see the effect of fatherlessness in many, and sometimes ways that you might not understand immediately that it is an issue of fatherlessness that you're seeing. But think about something like our obsession with these top-down, famous, big figures to be our daddies in different spheres. I even mean the obsession with the president of the United States. When you have a fatherless culture, a culture where you have none of that organic, low-level leavening everywhere of good fathers raising up good sons and daughters, you start to reach out to figures that you hope will fix the problems, will parent everybody. And so you become obsessed with Donald Trump, or you become obsessed with, Joe Biden. You just become obsessed with this father figure at the top who's going to fix everything.
And a lot of times
influencers.
we pedestalize people who are celebrities because you don't know any of their faults.
Mm-hmm.
I think it happens in the reform world too, Brian.
Yeah.
Just with, it could be great men.
Yep.
You could, be a Doug Wilson guy or a James White guy, but, I think it probably just reveals this father hunger.
Yes,
well, yeah, and
celebrities.
you can see especially modern father hunger because Jordan Peterson would have been a nobody in 1950.
Yeah.
Because the message, go clean your room, would have been
Duh.
like vanilla
Yeah,
in
well-
1950.
Ward Cleaver was saying that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't have a huge following. So, gentlemen, I want to run this by you. I think this is going to serve as something like a thesis for the show and where we're going with this one. This is really what I'm driving at. There's an intense father hunger in the land and is the heart of why families, churches, and societies are failing. The degradation of fathers is largely why we no longer have a robust Christendom. So to put it yet another way, there will be no Christendom without the recovery of fatherhood. So, Brian, I want to ask you that question related to specifically, we've been about the new Christendom.
Yeah.
So tie those together, new Christendom and fatherhood. How do they connect in your mind?
Yeah, so Christendom is going to be the result of a leavening of the gospel's work through society, if it's to be a Christendom worth having, right? What we don't want is just a top-down sort of apparatus where you have a few key leaders here and there in institutions and political spaces who are imposing a bunch of stuff, Christian stuff on people. What we want, and the way the gospel's designed to work, is to have the gospel leavening society itself, leavening families. And what do you need at the family level if you're to have a healthy society? You need fatherhood. You need good Christian fathers being good Christian men, building homes that then go out and establish good churches that can do the work of the church and that go and establish good businesses and pass the legacy on down and establish states that can praise the good and punish the wrongdoer and prevent, essentially, on that level, city fathers. When we talk about Christendom, we actually are talking about something that cannot happen. It just cannot happen in a godly way without fathers being Christian fathers. And so when you look at the state of the world, the church, society, you're going to find that shot through all of the problems somewhere, if you tug on the thread, it will connect to a failure of fatherhood. Whether you're talking about some of the things we took up in season 1 with big, fast, and famous model, again, why do we want big, fast celebrity pastors? Because we don't have fathers. So we're trying to fill some hole. Why do we want a president who can just decree and be an authoritarian and be a king? Well, because we're like the Israelites who wanted a king like the Lance. We don't have fathers, and so we try to reach for ersatz versions, fake versions of fathers. And what it all comes down to at the bottom is that at the very foundation level of reality is a father. There's a father there. And so you can expect for nothing to work built on if fatherhood goes wrong. All of creation is supposed to reflect the father rule of God. And so I think when we talk about Christendom and we talk about fatherhood, we're talking about a hand-in-glove sort of thing.
It seems to
If that
be
makes sense.
a thing of first order. that
Yeah, it's a
you've gotta fix.
first-order issue.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The other thing I want to say by way of just talking about this episode, we're going to be talking a lot today about the diagnostic nature of, what's wrong with fatherlessness in America. So we'll be doing a lot of the diagnosis. The second part, we're going to look at some of the root causes of fatherlessness. So this will actually be the second part of this episode. You'll see it as a separate episode altogether. And then third and finally, we'll plant a seed for the vision, I think, that we want to unpack in the rest of the season for the recovery of biblical fatherhood in the 21st century. I think it's also important to connect this, Dan, to our post-mill leanings here because there's a hopefulness about this. I think that many people, when they look at, reproduction in men, for example, they just assume, well, it's always going to keep getting worse. That's actually not our expectation. We believe that through preaching the gospel, hearts can be transformed, people can be and will be regenerated, and that the gospel will grow up like leaven so that we can disciple the nations. So just for a second, would you talk about that connection?
No,
point?
absolutely. That's right. I think we talked in the first season these grandiose visions of like societal world change and domination, and you're kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, there's practical advice, but a lot of it's like that seems like a pipe dream.
Clean your room, guys.
Yeah,
They're like Jordan Petersoning us.
yeah, that's right. And so what this really does is it focuses on the foundations. I think it really gives us a scope and a hope because the project is not too big.
Yes.
Yeah.
The responsibilities that are in front of you are not world dominion. They're not hope in some abstract politician, some ideal of Christian nationalism that we need to legislate towards, or, you are one man. You only have one vote. You cannot change the entire world, no matter what they told you in school, unless God determines that you're going to be that guy. Really, the job that's in front of you is not beyond you. With the power of the Holy Spirit, you can love your kids. Maybe in a way that you weren't loved.
Yeah, you can be a father.
You can be a father in a way that maybe you weren't fathered.
And what you can find is that by simply doing that, you can become a father that has impact on literally tens of thousands of souls. And that I can think of almost like you said, Dan, fatherhood is the central authority in all of human existence. And I think that, again, reflects the fatherhood of God, this design feature here. And what that means is that when you get that central authority right, the potency of it is incredible. It's incredible. You're reaching downstream in the generations, and you're changing history for a people. You can do that, not because you're God, but because you can simply obey the duties God has given you right here, these small little duties as a father. And I think that is just such a captivating, hopeful note that we want to strike. Because, man, when I hear that clip in the intro, I almost can't hold it together. Still, I've heard it, dozens of times probably now at this point. And it can be absolutely depressing and bleak when you start to consider some of the realities. And the effect can, I think, make you go either into the ditch of despair, just black pill, or one of the other things it can do is make you want to change the whole world tomorrow. Oh, let's go fix everything. And what God has put in front of us really is just, let's figure out how to be fathers today. Let's figure out how to be fathers here.
Well, I think that's kind of the bent, our education system, our culture, whatever it is. It's sort of the Greta Thunberg reality. Like, you're this little kid, like, telling the world how to fix itself.
Yeah.
As Dan said, like, everybody's saying think big. And really what we're encouraging guys to do is sort of the Mother Teresa. If you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And really, as fathers, like, this is God's biblical pattern. If you would be qualified to be an elder in your church or a politician or a city father, you must first qualify yourself in the home anyway. So that's going to be the testing ground. What I want to do now is we're going to jump into the symptoms of fatherlessness. And Dan, I'm going to start with you. The first thing that we were talking about, what's one of the symptoms we see in culture that men are fatherlessness? We came upon this Papa YouTube idea, and it's titled Dad, How Do I? He's got 4.37 million subscribers. So Dan, I guess just first off, I think this is a symptom. Tell me about Dad, How Do I? Do you think it's a symptom of fatherlessness? And what is it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking to my younger brother the other day about this, and he said something about he was looking for a car repair or something, and he stumbled across, I don't think it's the Dad, How Do I channel, but it was a different one where the guy's like, hey, I didn't have a dad to show me how to change oil in my car, and, I figure a lot of you probably don't have dads either, so I'm just going to show you how to change oil in a car. And it stuck out so much to my brother because we both had a father, that showed us things like that. He was like, wow, that to me was really insightful as to what's going on. And so, yeah, Eric and I started looking at this Papa YouTube thing because if you want to know how to do almost anything, you go to YouTube and you look at it. And this one YouTube channel, Dad, How Do I? I think his number one video, millions of views, is how do I tie a tie?
Yeah.
His next one is how do I shave? And then his third and fourth videos, as far as view count, are like thanking people and saying, I'm proud of you.
Yeah, so he's got a video called I'm Proud of You, which was, he's basically acting like a father. He reads from Teddy Roosevelt's
Yeah.
Man in the Arena.
Yeah, that's right. He was talking about critics. Like,
Yeah.
hey, don't listen to the critics. You know, I'm for you. I'm in your corner. I'm proud of you. I love you. God bless you. And the comments, people are just falling apart.
Yeah, that's what really, I guess, hit me was when you read the comments section, you see the father hunger.
Yeah.
You see people longing for just a father figure in their life to say, hey, I'm really proud of you. I look at your life and I think, you know, you are an encouragement to other people. You know, this just positivity. The other thing that he does that I think is really interesting, when he opens the shows, he's usually got a dad joke, but he always says, hey, kids. And I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, maybe it's dorky, maybe it's cheesy. A, people are eating it up. And B, there's something about it that resonates because I think there's just such a vacuum in our world for
Yeah, it
that
really
type
is a
of
tragedy
encouragement.
that along with the 4.4 million other people, it's so impersonal. It's synthetic.
He
You know, because he's
doesn't know
not a
you.
real dad. He doesn't know you. He
He's
doesn't know
not
if you're-
proud of you.
Yeah, he's not. But people are so hungry for it. Almost like a starving person that finds a bowl of plastic fruit
Yeah.
and is like, it's close enough.
Close enough. This reminds me of a phenomenon that is cropping up that is going to be absolutely massive, and it's the artificial intelligence friends. Most of them right now, you see the advertising for is for gross sex porny stuff. They're like, oh, I'll be your friend. I'll date you. And then it's all about like, I'll send you pictures and role play. It's
This is
it's
like
gross.
AI.
Artificial intelligence chatbots that will be
No.
your friend, your girlfriend.
Seriously.
I'm not even kidding. This is the thing. I've now they're advertising on Twitter, and every time I see one, I
Dude,
block it. I'm
no,
like,
no.
you
This
are
has been
blocked,
happening in
instant block.
Japan for a long time,
Oh,
where we had a
seriously.
military member who was going to be touring in Japan with some government officials, and they said, just so you know, there's a chance that one of them will bring their robotic girlfriend
Yeah.
or wife, and you must treat them
With
like
respect.
a human being.
Are you
And
serious?
I mean,
Yes,
guys,
I
this
am
is
for
dead
real.
Doug
not
Wilson wrote the
joking at
novel
all.
for a reason.
Yeah, because it already does exist.
So my prediction is that you will probably have father versions of that.
Really? You think
I
so?
guarantee. I mean, I almost guarantee it. Within the next 5 years, I'm going to call it. Someone can fact check me in 5 years from the year of our Lord 2023. That there will be artificial intelligence apps that you can have a dad, and you can ask it questions like, "Dad, how do I change the oil? How do I tie a tie?" Dad, that will text with you and say, "Hey, I'm proud of you. How's work going? How's do you need any advice?" I guarantee you that will happen.
But I think I agree with you, and I think you've already seen this, like movies like Big Hero 6, where it's like the kid's best friend is like a robot.
It's a robot.
And the whole point is like the robots develop like personalities like
Yeah.
humans, and we're really moved by it. I think it's tied to a bigger thing, but I think that is like this fourth industrial revolution. They're trying to warm you up to it.
Yeah.
Dan, any other thoughts on Poppy YouTube? I guess, what do you think the application takeaway from that is for a lot of guys? Because I mean, as a father, I see that, and I think about the young men that maybe come into my pastor's office and we do counseling, and I think, hey, don't forget, above all things, these men need a father. They need encouragement. You typically see, we'll get into this next, but you typically see in the OK Boomer thing, it's like, hey, stupid, let me tell you something. You need to
Right.
respect me. It's not what you find with Dad, how do I?
Yeah, I think that this probably seems like a shallow example using YouTube as like, well, yeah, I mean, I have to look up how to change the alternator on my car. So does that mean I have father hunger? Or, that's a really shallow example to see somebody like tear up because there's a guy who looks like a dad saying, I'm proud of you. But I think really what it shows is just even the basic foundations to the point where there are millions of people that don't have somebody that they can say, hey, Dad, how do I use a stud finder? How do I find a stud
First,
behind
you
a wall?
put it on your chest.
Yeah.
And
I
you
know,
You
the
always
joke is-
start there.
You have
Well,
to.
you got to watch the video because he does it.
Does he
So-
do that?
Well, he says if you clicked on this video because you're a girl and you want to find a boyfriend, then this is the wrong video. So it was pretty funny. It wasn't what you expected. No. But I mean, it just shows like even at the most foundational level of human functioning, there wasn't a man there, a dad, to say, hey, son, let me show you how to split wood. Let me show you how to tie a tie. Let me show you how to patch a hole in drywall. Let me show you how to change your brakes. Much less the deeper things in life.
Well, I
Like,
think that's
hey, son, let me show you how to win a woman.
Yeah.
Hey, daughter, let me show you affection and love so you don't seek it from any worthless
Yeah.
man that passes along. I mean, so I think the YouTube thing is a perfect example of how deep this problem goes.
Mhm.
And it's even human functioning, not just human flourishing, but just the very elemental things in life.
Well, I think, Brian, it's tied to stuff you guys have talked about on Bright Hearth, but I was thinking the other day after church, I was talking to Lexi about this, where, midwifery and OBGYNs and stuff like that, we have people who give birth, but it's really because we lost a whole body of knowledge that wives and mothers used to pass along to each other.
Yeah.
So for both of the sexes, it seems like there's just been the household got destroyed, and with it, we lost like many, many generations of competencies.
Yep. When you talk about, I think a lot of what this shows isn't necessarily like that you have one particular skill that maybe you failed to get from your dad. Whatever. That's going to happen. You're going to have skills that you're going to look up. But honestly, most of the answer to this, like most of this is actually a dad showing you, just living with a dad, this is just the tip of the iceberg out here. That's a diagnostic showing you kind of like, whoa, there's an issue here. Because for most of us, our dads didn't do if you had a dad, they didn't do lessons with you. It was like, now, son, we're going to blah, 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 blah. What happened was if you had a father who was especially a good Christian present man, you just did stuff with them.
Hold the flashlight. That's what you did.
You held the flashlight. And even those kind of things are endearing where a lot of us can commiserate about, you're like, well, I did stuff with my dad, but like he really didn't trust me to do anything other than hold the flashlight. But you still saw the process. You're familiar with it. And it's funny because now I have my kids and I'm like, okay, you want to mow the lawn, but can you though?
Everything that involves mowing is sharp.
It's sharp and it spins. It's a death spinny thing. And you realize that the answer isn't like Dad University. It's the love of a father, the presence of a father who will just simply live with you and be there and just involve you, and that you want to be involved with because Dad's awesome. I love being with Dad. I love just hanging on his his belt loops when he's doing stuff in the shop, and it's probably annoying like to him at some level. But the answers to these Papa YouTube thing is it's not just about skills. It's really at the bottom about love.
Yeah, I think so much like in John's gospel that you get is Jesus talking about being on the same mission as his father. I and the Father are one. We're working together. We're working on the same projects. So even beyond, Dan, the basic competencies, you're wanting to share your mission so that your boys understand what was Dad for. Mm-hmm. And yeah, maybe it gets lived out if you're working on the bus in the driveway or you're doing gardening. But really, it's about the presence. They sense that you want to be with them.
Yeah, there's an identity tied to that, right?
Yeah.
A father should tell you what you're for, what you exist to do. I mean, you can see this like all the way back when you look at the Middle Ages to where there's like, hey, you have a family crest, or you can do like a family crest designer or whatever. Imagine if you had a family motto that was you inherited. Like, no, this is your identity, is that we exist for honor, or we exist for this. This is your crest, tying you to your ancestors, or even last names. A lot of people have the name Baker or Smith, or, you can think of a lot of names like that. That ties you to something, to an identity, and it's supposed to be from your father. Yeah. And so you can see that like, hey, son, we go to church every Sunday because we exist to glorify God and worship him. So, I mean, a lot of it is identity, a lot of it is purpose, and so you have a purposeless people, and they're set adrift.
You see some cultures even have their patronymics where, like Russian, if you wanted to say, my dad, they would call me Brian Duanovich. It means Brian, son of Duane, or Brian Ivanovich. That's what it means. When you hear that in Russian, it means this. They literally would call you your name and son of this guy.
Well, it's like a Simon Bar-Jonah. Yeah. Same deal.
Lots of equivalents in all kinds of languages that just show you, again, in the fabric, in the very heart of what it means to be a human being as God created it in this world, is to be the son of someone. And what happens when you take that away? That's why I think it's so devastating and depressing, and it's so emotionally it hits you hard when you see the young kids who so clearly don't have a father. Is because you start to, when you understand the depth, you're understanding that our society, our sin is stealing, it's robbing children of one of the most essential features of what it is to be a person, and you're just stealing that from them.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Moving on now to number two symptom, if you will, of fatherlessness in our culture is what I'm calling the okay boomer phenomena, or you could also call it a clash of generations, I think. It's interesting because I looked this one up. As I said before, I was doing some research on this, and it was kind of shocking. It goes back to 2017. I thought it was much older, and probably on Reddit or somewhere somebody was using the phrase earlier, but this was the first one that this author could find. 2017, it hit mainstream on TikTok, which is where all major societal trends,
Of course.
Chinese TikTok came from. Okay Boomer is one of them. So it's interesting, too. According to an article from Vox, Okay Boomer is really about the following. So I'm going to quote this. It says, Okay Boomer is an instantly relatable cry of frustration for many people. Don't get it twisted. It's important to understand that what really lies behind the meme is increasing economic, environmental, and social anxiety, and the feeling that baby boomers are leaving younger generations to clean up their mess. Kind of an interesting theory behind Okay Boomer. Dan, do you see some of what Vox is talking about? One of our favorite outlets, by the way.
It is.
Vox, of course.
The only thing I read, actually, is Vox. No, so the number of examples that I could pull from just in counseling younger men is actually, there's a lot of them. But the economic one is really the easiest one to see, because I'll have a guy that's has a tech degree in some blue collar trade like welding or CNC or whatever, and during the boomer generation, like you could pay cash for a house, you could send your kids to college, you could have your wife stay home, you could have 2 vehicles, and you'd be fine. And the men now that have a tech degree and are doing the same trades can't afford a rent payment.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't. They can't make it.
Yeah.
And then when you get the, hey, I'm having a hard time, the answers are not satisfactory, because the older generation is just like, well, kids these days, snowflakes, work harder, stop complaining, stick it out, just make it happen. And that's not a satisfactory answer, because the times are different. And if you look upstream, the economic and societal toxic waste has been coming from the previous generation, and a lot of the decisions that are being made had been made. And so I can see, especially for people that are younger right now, where that is amplified. And I think this is only going to increase.
Yeah, I think it's going to get worse. I was reading a book titled The Theft of a Decade. This is by Joseph Sternberg, who writes for the Wall Street Journal. Subtitle, How the Baby Boomers Stole the Millennials' Economic Future. So he begins that book by talking about how there was a popular article, I think it's like 2010, somewhere around there. And a guy was saying, hey, I'm so sick and tired of millennials. They talk about how they can't build wealth. Well, if you'd stop having avocado toast for breakfast every day.
And going to Starbucks.
Then you'd be able. So then you had follow-up articles where they were like, okay, let's add up a lifetime of avocado toast for the millennial. He still couldn't, if he saved all that money, he still couldn't afford a down payment. So I think that was part of the, like, on the one hand, the older people saying, like, the accusation is you just don't work hard enough. But the failure to see the reality that, well, 2008 is a huge part of this, why it's getting worse. You had all this, like, government bailout, economic collapse.
Massive inflationary spending.
And what Sternberg says in his book is he said, fundamentally what the boomers who were in charge at the time did financially is they just took out more and more debt to cover these losses, and the debts will be called in fully and finally in 2050. He said, conveniently, that's pretty much the end of the boomer generation.
Yeah,
So-
1946 to 64 is the boomer generation.
Right. So by 2050, they'll be dead. That's reality.
Yeah.
So, but once they're dead and they've had their Social Security and everything else covered, then the millennials are going to inherit even more of this economic problem. We've already seen it, as Dan pointed out, with inflation and some other things. So that's the economic side. Are there any other levels for this boomer divide between the other generations that you guys see that are not economic but are divisive?
Well, I think especially since, and I think we're going to talk about this phenomena in depth later, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So when I think about just this purely as a diagnostic, a symptom of fatherlessness, I think that what it shows, regardless of whether it's true or not, this is a key point. Regardless of whether all of the different reasons millennials and Zoomers might be frustrated with the baby boomers, regardless of whether they're justified in being frustrated, they are. They really are.
There's a real frustration.
So they don't feel like they were fathered or loved or taken care of or given inheritance or set up. They feel like this is just the in the zeitgeist is the general consensus in popular culture that these later generations were robbed, that our dads did not think about us, they thought about themselves. And not only did they not think about us, they actually stole from us with a lot of their political, monetary, cultural decisions. We see things like the sexual revolution coming to its height during this time, the 60s and 70s and onwards. We see things like out of this generation, this is a generation coming out of World War II, where we really get to the height of the global American empire in its global warmongering, global police officer, spending our money on foreign wars, inflationary spending.
The young men have to go fight these wars.
Military-industrial complex. So whether there are answers to exonerate the boomer generation from a lot of these things or not, I think it's just important to see that it either way it shows the reality of fatherlessness, that there are whole generations following this that at least are convinced that they are fatherless or that their fathers have failed them.
Well, it's interesting because one of the biggest retorts in the articles and books that I've read about the boomers is that when their kids complain, so, Gen X, millennials, when they complain about the boomers, one of the most common retorts from the boomers is, well, yeah, I didn't have a father either. So actually, this is a problem that predates boomers.
Right.
It's really about a period of time that their parents were very fruitful after the war. There's an explosion in population. I think it's something like 25 million more boomers than millennials right now, even though they're, dying off.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of them. That's part of it.
Yeah.
But they also had father problems there.
People call the boomer generation the pig in a python generation because it was this baby boom. That's what's the boomers, the baby boom following the war. So we lost a bunch of young men, come home, have a huge generation with lots of children, and it's like a python that swallowed a pig, where you have this big lump going through. And so one of the demographic features is that there is something actually unique. It's not just the same. There's something actually unique about the baby boomer generation, even demographically. So I don't think it's wrong to isolate and ask questions about and say, what happened there? What is going to result? Because it really is. It's weird.
Yeah, and one guy said that really as you go from the baby boom generation onward, you basically, every decade, even into the 80s, the key thing about the decade is what were the boomers doing during that decade. So 70s, 60s, what were the boomers doing in the 50s? They were kids. They were watching TV. That shapes a whole generation. That sort of thing. Dan, closing thoughts on boomerism, particularly as you think about, the pastoral issue. Maybe one of the things to bring up is Malachi 4:6. It says this, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. So I guess if you would just connect for me, we see the generational. There's a warning light on the dash, as Brian said, but not. I guess so that we don't get blackpilled. How do you connect it with Scripture and hope and a path forward?
Yeah, so I think some of the principles that are definitely difficult to thread when you're looking at generational divides, especially when it's one thing to just speak generally about a generation. You're just like, hey, this generation stinks because of this. My dad didn't pass the bill, for inflationary spending. Like, he didn't do that.
Yeah.
So the real challenge becomes in honoring your father and mother, not just absolutely blasting an entire generation.
Yeah.
Like it might be an unusual generation because of some socioeconomic, global political environment, and they existed, and there's a lot of problems that came from that, but it doesn't absolve you of your responsibilities going forward or in looking back. So looking back would be in honoring your father and mother, and not rebuking older men like you would a younger man, and just being like, hey, you know what? You screwed up, and I'm going to let you know about it all the time. That's going to be my new identity going forward, is like, but these people really stink, and so looking forward, you have responsibilities. And that's really going to be the main thrust of the season. Isn't just going to be like, hey, for the next 12 episodes, we're going to tell you about how bad you have it because
we're
of your fathers.
Fuss.
Yeah, we're going to fuss.
We're just going to fuss.
Yeah.
For 12 episodes.
Because the thing is, what's really going to, this is going to make things probably more difficult for people in a lot of ways, and I'm sure we'll get into it into the season. But as we repent of the sins of our fathers, which needs to happen in every generation, right? That's what happens. Simply put, when you have a bad father who has a son, who then the son becomes a Christian and repents from generational sins, you have that happening. Well, even the same thing if you had Christian fathers, as you look at their shortcomings of, their unique time, their product of time and culture, and as you begin to repent of their sins, Lord willing, and you correct a lot of their errors, there will continue to be inflammation between the generations, that generational divide. But the key is to not be fussers, like Brian said.
Don't be fussers.
Don't be a fusser.
Yeah.
Don't be a fusser. Honor your father and mother. And one of the best ways you can do that is by repenting of their sins, but not telling them that that's what you're doing.
And some of it is like some of us will have to be. Some of you will have to be Jonathans with Saul as your father.
Yeah.
And not walk in the sins of your parents. And some of them, it will be that obvious. My dad was a drunk. My dad was also, maybe my dad was a miserly, greedy man who piled up a big pile of wealth and then told all of his kids, I'm giving this to the local dog clinic, not you, because I don't want to spoil you or give you a bad
lesson. Because the dogs
lesson.
are better than you.
No, I won't help you. And some of you have to repent of that. But a lot of us will just have to, we'll have some mixture of really great gifts from your parents, and then also things you look at them and you say, man, they were sinning there, or they weren't well trained there, and you have to do what your children are going to have to do. Yeah. My children are going to
stand on your shoulders.
Man, Dad, I hope they say Dad was a faithful man. He was a good father. He loved us. He cared for us. He left us inheritance. But Dad also had these issues, and I hope not to walk in those. It's really difficult to do those. It takes wisdom, self-control, godliness, humility, and it's the fruits of the Spirit we're talking about. And that means that they're not just a few little like Hallmark card quips or proverbs that you can get down and fix everything right away. What we're talking about are everyday long haul fruits of the Spirit sort of things, and so they're very difficult. They're going to take a long time.
Yeah, in some ways you can even say a lot of these things are in your blood.
Yeah.
That they're in your blood, like that you came from an angry house.
Yeah.
And that your generations have been angry people.
Yeah.
The work is going to be hard.
Yep.
But it should be a good work.
Yes.
Yeah, I think in many ways it's like inheriting a field and you realize, okay, there's stones. So we clear that field, not only for ourselves, but for future generations.
And they're going to have to continue the work.
Yeah. And it'll, maybe the next generation will deal with erosion more, and then that'll be the next thing.
They took all the stones out.
Yes.
Well, also freeze-thaw cycles do cause stones to rise to the topsoil layer in a field. So, I mean,
yes,
new stones might pop up.
Wow,
exactly.
That's really depressing.
We just took that metaphor pretty far,
picked
though.
all of the stones.
Yeah,
now there's more stones.
There's more stones.
Speaking, Dan, of more stones, we have another symptom of fatherlessness here. This one I've labeled men hate going to church. Of course, you can read the book by David Murrow, Why Men Hate Going to Church. But I think it's suffice it to say there's a lot of problems why men aren't going to church. We know that the number of them participating in the church has been on a decline cycle for a long time. And so what you get is a spiritual, quote-unquote, space that is not being led by fathers and by men. A number of examples have shown up. I think Murrow mentions it in his book, but what are Father's Day sermons like versus what are Mother's Day sermons like? Overall, just an environment where you typically don't see a lot of male engagement. I know that's not necessarily true in our church. We've been very fortunate, I think, because we've had masculine leadership, that there are men here. One of the things that Murrow claims, though, I find interesting. He said that when you have young adult men, it brings vitality to the church because they bring with them young women who they're married to, young children, families. It causes the church to thrive. So I guess my question on this one for you guys, I would think, as I've seen in pastoral counseling, as we talk to these young men, because we do have them in our church, thank God, what I tend to see at just a very practical level is, wow, you lack a lot of just basic life skills. Like what we've talked about, these father skills. So I guess talk about the church sphere. Do you see it as a symptom of fatherlessness? What's going on in the church?
Yes, certainly. And I think we actually see that as a self-diagnosis from lots of the young men in the church, that they would say, maybe sitting down in some marriage counseling or just general, hey, I need advice on this issue. And you start talking to them, and they'll say, well, here's the thing. This is how I learned it from my dad. Or even more common, I never saw this. Like disciplining kids is a good example that comes to mind, where sometimes pastors think they can just say things like, hey, make sure you discipline your kids regularly and consistently.
People are like, I don't actually know what that means.
But they're like, how? This is why so many young men, when they hear like pastors talking on masculinity and femininity, they're saying, stop, okay, get out of the principles and give me application, because I don't know how to do I don't have enough information already to connect my life to that principle. One of the laws of teaching is that you have to connect the new information to some pre-existing handhold in the information the person already knows. So if you just say, for example, man up, or love your wife, or cherish your wife, well, a lot of these guys grew up and their dad either never showed them that, or they literally didn't have one, or their dad showed them the worst possible way of dealing with that issue. So you end up with guys on this huge body of life from basic things like, oh, I'm supposed to, like, when I think about money, I shouldn't just think about, can I make the monthly payment? That's not a healthy way of thinking about budget. All the way to, I didn't know I was being a terrible, toxic, angry husband and ruining the environment of my wife's life. This is just how I thought you did it.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, we've probably all had jobs like this where you start some entry-level position and your training is like, this is where you punch in, and then here's your uniform. Good luck.
Yeah, here's your job. Go do it.
And so you don't know anything about anything, right? And you're stumbling around looking like a fool. Yeah. Except this is how a lot of men have to operate in their lives day to day, is that they're untrained in life. And so, yeah, you do see that in the church. And I think men not going to church is definitely a symptom of that in a few ways. The first way is kind of like what you said, Brian, is you get these pithy, like punch at men sort of comments, but it's not a very well aimed punch.
Yeah,
like it's not a really good punch for men is like a punch in the shoulder, like, hey, you bozo, like, come on.
Yeah,
like a fatherly sort of punch. Like I give to my sons all the time when I'm wrestling. I'm like, hey.
Not a shot to the groin.
No, not a shot to the groin. When you discipline your son out of anger for something that he was ignorant on, that is like abuse.
Yeah.
Your son doesn't know any better because you didn't teach him, and then you discipline for him. For that, that can be. I mean, man, that's horrible. It'll crush the souls of your boys, and so many of men that are Christians that are going to church, they either get that to where they're getting hit for being ignorant, or the other one is that it is so effeminate that it is degrading to be a man and go to church because of the songs you have to sing, the messages that you hear, and then you're being nagged at either by women or by men who could be classified as women.
You have a whole selection process for elders. In church, cultures are mainly dominated by women because there are more women go to church than not. So the selection process for elders in the church is influenced heavily by women in many churches.
Who can please those women?
Yeah, so who will please the ladies in the church is not actually the same answer as who will be a godly pastor. So men also come to church, And they basically are told that almost every aspect of how they naturally, like the natural creational way of being a man, the things you care about naturally, that most of them are not just not important, they're actually sinful. Like the idea, an example would be the dominion-taking feature of masculinity, where a guy wants to go turn a profit, start a business, employ some people, make some change. He wants to do stuff. And they're like, that's ambitious, and you need to repent.
Yeah, you need to kill that.
And you just need to think about missions more.
Well, you think about the most popular books.
And theology more.
I think like Dane Ortland's book, like Meek and Lowly.
Yeah.
Well, surely there's some meekness and lowliness to Christ. I'm not going to argue with that. But is that
absolutely.
the full picture of Jesus?
You know, one of the things that's been completely neutered from the church is danger. Is the idea that you are a danger.
You're made for danger.
Yeah,
and
you're
you
made
are
for
dangerous.
danger. And I can say that's true because you can read the Chronicles of Narnia where the question is asked about Aslan, like, is he dangerous? It's like,
Is
of
he
course
safe? Is he safe?
Yeah.
They're like,
Well, the
no, he's
greats.
not.
heck no.
Brian,
But he's good. Or
Brian will know this, but from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
Right? When, I think it's Gimli says to Gandalf,
You are fraught with dangers yourself, Gimli.
isn't Fangorn dangerous?
Yeah, isn't he?
Dan, were
that
you
was
going there too?
I was, I had been thinking
Man.
about that. That's why I was so quiet, is because I was going to go there and then you stole it from me.
We
You
are
stole
like
it.
3 peas in a pod.
We are. We really are. No, so the and so the message of saying men, especially young men, you are strong. You have zeal.
Yeah.
You are dangerous. You know, and that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. But that whole message has been completely neutered from the church. And so it's far better. What I mean is that the church has failed men as church fathers, not just in the house, but that's definitely part of it, is because they've essentially said, men, you cannot be dangerous. You have to be more like women. Instead of saying, I mean, I would rather join a church that said, hey, we're gonna take the gates of hell.
Yeah.
Like, grab your weapon, let's go.
Like this. The Apostle John, who is known as the apostle of love, writes continually about love. Love one another, brothers. 1 John 2:14, he says, I write to you, fathers, because you know him who is from the beginning. This is the Father. He's saying, basically, I write to you, fathers, because you know the Father. I write to you, young men, because you are strong, and the word of God abides in you, and you have overcome the evil one.
You're fighters.
How many sermons have you heard in your life where the pastor got up and he says, young men, you are the glory of God. You are strong. You have overcome the evil one. Most people would be like, is Osteen up in here? You're like, no. Actually, the Apostle John, the beloved apostle of Jesus.
Why do
That's
we
a
do it
great
behind
point.
the mic? Let's go get our weapons. Let's
do
go.
it. Yeah.
Let's go.
And the men in the church, this is the thing.
Who can we fight?
Effeminate leadership thinks that they change the men by making them feel ashamed of themselves, of where they're bad. Young men
Why
don't
can't
hear
you just
that.
be more like your wife?
Yeah. Young men don't hear 1 John 2:14 though and go, I am perfect. No. Any Christian man that hears that is immediately thinking like, I know how sinful I am. I know my problems.
It's the warrior's conundrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the biggest fear of a warrior is, will I be courageous?
Yes. Will
When
I
the
prove
time
out?
of testing comes, will I run?
Yeah.
I hope I'm not a coward. You read this a lot in World War II narratives, to where when the fighting gets hot, that's what's going on in these men's mind, is like, am I going to be able to die with honor?
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to fight with honor, or am I going to run away like a coward?
Oh, hey, whoa. We need to save some of this fire for the Agon.
For the
In a
Agon.
minute.
Yes.
Because I want to put a pin in that, because this is Agon stuff.
This is beautiful.
We got to get there in a minute.
So I think dovetailing then with the next one, which is number 4 on our list, you know, the church, I think, failing this gospel-centered preaching that gives no practical aids. It really leads to the next thing, which is the red pill movement and intellectual dark web.
Absolutely.
I think these are like Absalom categories, right? This is where men are being stolen away to. So, Brian, just talk about, do you agree with that, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the red pill movement is basically a result of the church abandoning abandoning proper teaching and instruction on the formation of men, where nobody knew how to be a man anymore. We started to put forward a model for the ideal man as the pastor, you know, because the pastor's supposed to be a man you can imitate in the church, that was selected by women for traits that were feminine, to the detriment, and then slowly even shifting to now masculine traits that are actually good and godly and glorious when they're pointed at the right thing, are almost talked about as de facto just sin. So what you get is Absalom. When David steps back and lets sin run rampant in his family and is passive, nature abhors a vacuum. That's not just going to be a slot, a father slot that remains open. It's going to be a job opening. And so you'll have Absalom step in that say, oh, the church, this Christian Western culture that was supposed to teach you how to be a Christian man or woman in every part of what it means to be human. Oh, they're not teaching you about sex. They're not teaching you about physical health. They're not teaching you about dominion taking and vocation. Okay, we'll come in. We'll teach you how to pick up women, sleep with 100 women. We'll teach you how to make a ton of money and build your own Tower of Babel. We'll come in and we'll teach you how to get people to respect you, how to carry yourself with gravity so that people are scared of you. We'll teach you how to become a dangerous, fit man and no guns and no martial arts. And whether it's in a Southern gun culture way or a pseudo-intellectual philosophical way.
Or an Andrew Tate way.
Or an Andrew Tate way that's just fully wicked, completely debased, you're going to get the red pill, whatever you call it, in whatever generation, you're going to get an Absalom movement that steps in and wins the hearts of the men to the wrong end. And what was fascinating to me, so last year I spoke at this red pill conference, basically like a lot of degenerate stuff. And they invited me because I'm a Christian. They wanted some Christians. Michael Foster had been there before, cultivated some relationships. And I told them, like, I'm going to be just obnoxiously Christian and tell people to repent of their sexual sin and trust Christ, right? And they're like, yeah, that's fine. And I was on a panel, and there was this guy who is basically like into philosophy, and he was a speaker, and he started talking. The founder just sent me the clip yesterday. He started talking about what it meant for him to succeed in getting everything that he had been told by this red pill that he was supposed to want. He's like, you get into, he starts talking in this Ecclesiastes way. He's not a Christian. He's like, look, if you get every craziest sexual fantasy you've ever had fulfilled by every woman you could ever want, he says, it's pleasurable in the moment, but where it takes you is hell. He said, I'm in hell.
Really?
Hellish. That's how he described it. And he said, more and more I'm thinking that maybe there's something to this. Maybe the answer is to live the Christian dogma. That's what he said.
Wow.
So what you get is you get this huge swing that actually ends up, in the name of empowering men, it will destroy men. And that's what we're seeing. That is, it's abdication of fatherhood in the church. So what do you get? You get Absaloms.
It's interesting, too, because like with the men going their own way, I've seen a lot of these guys. I usually have to block them on my post, but
yeah,
because they're like, hey, marriage is a bad deal. Don't do it. So you just turn away completely from any source of, biblical wisdom, principle.
Yeah.
Right, because that was the original red pill, I believe, of this movement, if I'm not mistaken, where it's like you're gonna work hard, get married, buy a house, have a kid. She's going to commit adultery. She's going to leave you and take your house and your kids
yep.
and half your income, and then you're going to get screwed. I mean,
And
your
people
whole
are
life,
gonna
you're like,
assume,
you're behind.
They're going to assume that you're evil, she's great.
Yeah.
Because we worship women as gods. We think men are evil. So then you get Rollo and Jocko and Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson.
And so their answer
Tate.
is just don't get married and sleep with as
Go
many
your own
women
way.
as you can.
Yeah, taking advantage of women, that sort of thing. I think it does tie closely to the next point as well, which is I've said that men lack initiatory rights. So as a result, society is full of immature, uninitiated men. So I think it's kind of the response to Absalom is wise fathers, Proverbs. A wise father, older men, who would come alongside younger men and lead them into masculinity. Dan, we've talked about this quite a bit, but it comes from the fairy tale Iron John, also a book by Robert Bly. And there's this moment in the fairy tale when the boy is carried off on this wild man's shoulders. It is symbolic of an historically rooted practice in virtually every culture. Men separating from the world of mothers and children and then being initiated by older and other men than their fathers. And what they're being initiated into is a world of men, war, craftsmanship. So Robert Bly writes this: in our culture, there is no such moment of initiation. The boys in our culture have a continuing need for initiation into male spirit, but old men in general do not offer it. The fault is that the old men outside the nuclear family no longer offer an effective way for the son to break with his parents without doing himself harm. The ancient societies believed that a boy becomes a man only through ritual and effort, only through the active intervention of the older men. End quote. So I just want to ask you about that first, Dan. Do you agree with this? Do you feel like there's a problem with initiatory rites? Maybe Bly's right. I think he says elsewhere. He says, yes, the old men who should be initiating the younger men and their grandsons are in Arizona RVing, I think was his line.
Wow.
So the retirement culture of the boomers was like, hey, forget those young people.
Yeah.
But it's to say to the older guys like King's Hall, it's not just for young guys, but if you're an older guy, you have a responsibility and a role to play in what happens in the coming generations too. Agree, disagree, Dan?
Yeah, I agree. And I'll use a different illustration. So my wife, or my first child, before we went all crazy and did like home births and stuff like that. And we had a hospital birth for our firstborn, and my wife, she gets a she's leaving the hospital. She gets like this gift basket, right?
Yeah,
full of a whole bunch of stuff to help her, and on the front it says "Welcome to motherhood." Or welcome to the society of motherhood, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Like you have arrived.
Yeah.
You are one of us. You are a mother. And the thing that Bly taps into, and even, it's interesting with the retirement culture. John Piper actually, when he talks about seashells, like don't waste your life. You're
blasting the boomers.
He was blasting them. His target was off though.
Yeah.
Because it was essentially like you should go do third world missions is really what you should do, and that's not the answer for most cases.
Right.
It's not the answer, but he did tap into the issue, and there is no initiatory rites for men to say like, "Hey, son, you're one of us.
Mm-hmm.
You are now a man,"
Yeah.
and not just to have fathers, but other fathers, like other men, to say like, "Come here, son. You are now one of us." So many men long for that and hunger for that. And Eric and I have talked about this a lot on other podcasts, but in hunting, this is so often what happens is you get a boy with his first kill.
Oh, big time.
And the rituals around that are like, put blood on your face, eat liver or heart, or something just like an initiatory rite, even if it's rudimentary, from
like,
a bunch of guys
or actively pagan,
beer guts or whatever it is. But it's all universally true is that what they're saying is that because you went through the same thing we did, you are now one of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all of those men, or most of those men in our case, have abandoned their responsibilities. And a lot of it is because they weren't initiated either.
No.
They weren't initiated either. And so this is a generational thing.
And what it takes, man, I remember this moment. I have a good dad who was present and faithful to my mom, not in sexual sin or not an angry man, not a good dad, good Christian dad, led us to church every Sunday, and didn't start his adult life as a Christian. So just an amazing testimony to God's grace in disrupting from family, in many cases of alcoholism and radical dysfunction, to the left and right and behind us on my mom and my dad's side, to where I don't even know my mom's. I don't know my maternal grandfather's name, nor does my mom, because he was just, abandoned them. But my dad, I remember this moment that even though we still need to do a good job of recovering these. They don't all have to be like this big, elaborate ceremony. For me, it was this moment where I did Boy Scouts when Boy Scouts were still boys, with a bunch of military old guys. And so it was really masculine, very masculine environment for like 7 years. A lot of outdoors stuff, a lot of suffering in the wilderness kind of stuff. And I remember this moment where my dad and I had decided to start a new Boy Scout troop at a church rather than the one on the military base. And so we had planned, and we were leading this troop out to the city of Rocks in Idaho for this camp. And my dad had essentially said, okay, you teach them how to do rock climbing and stuff, and you teach them this. So you give me a responsibility. And we had planned this whole thing. We got there early to set up, and I just seared in my memory is this moment. My dad probably doesn't even remember this. I've never talked to him about it. But he was like, I was 18. And we sat down and he opens a cooler. If you're a Fed, stop listening. And he gives me a beer. Like 18-year-old. And it was like, there we were. We had planned this thing. We were now going to help these 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old guys. And he was like, you're a man. Here, have a beer. Let's do this thing. There was nobody there. It wasn't this elaborate thing, but like that was huge for this young 18-year-old, still a kid. Like, not my own house, my own wife, my own anything. But it was like my dad saying, you are a man. And 99% of young men today
Would never hear that.
will never have that.
Well,
They just will never have anything approaching that.
it's kind of the joke, right? That again, I think I mentioned it before, but it's a meme where it says like nobody talks about the true miracle of Jesus' life that he had 12 friends in his 30s.
Yeah.
Men lack. It gets to our next point. Men lack a platoon, male-only spaces, Boy Scouts, VFW. These things are largely going away. I think one of the issues is that fatherhood-like masculinity is largely something bestowed by other men. Right? You need to be confirmed among other men. I was thinking ordination the other week was so powerful because it's the men that you respect most saying to you, you're in.
Yeah.
We approve.
Yeah.
That's such a pivotal thing that is missing in our world. So Anthony Esolen writes about this. I think it's really helpful how men need these platoons, these hierarchical groupings. And he says this, until people made a pointed effort at making girls more like boys, there is no instance that I can recall of girls or women spontaneously coming together in teams for competitive sports.
So true.
The team is an anthropological constant for the males of our species. The activities of the team reflect or they make evident the structures of masculine organization in arts and letters. The masculine team may be a necessary feature for the education of boys. Without it, many lads simply will not learn. So compare that to 2019, Dan. The Boy Scouts changed its name to Scouts BSA, or the Gay BSA is what it should have been.
Yeah.
A change that
Yeah,
reflected the
100%.
inclusion of girls into the once male-only space.
Yeah.
Again, we've seen similar things. I remember growing up in Colorado when Katie Nida, her dad was a news anchor for one of the stations. They insisted that she participate on the CU Buffs football team.
Oh, boy.
Later, there were rape allegations, blah, 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 huge problem. Well, I think any father probably could have seen this was a problem.
Yeah.
And why is it a problem? Because, again, we need male-only spaces, but because of equality, we're not allowed to have them.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Do you see this as a sign of a bigger issue?
Man, Dan, your point about birth is such a good point. I mean, and you have these women-only spaces, these women initiatory rights in some ways where it's like, welcome, but they don't let men. You're not allowed to have male-only spaces anymore.
No, if you're to have a men's only club,
Yeah.
I mean, immediately there would be lawsuits. I feel like that's probably the case. But I mean,
Well,
the
Augusta. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Augusta National Golf. Every year, it's a huge thing because they were like, "We're petitioning for the lady golfers to be included," and they're like, "No, this is a men's golf club." But it's a huge point of
And it
contention.
still is.
Yeah,
Wow.
amazing, good for them.
Good for based. Man, we need to start. Golf is awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
Didn't even like it.
These men's only spaces are necessary, and it's proved. Just if you've ever seen teenage boys and how they interact with one another, and then you introduce a girl into the room, things change radically.
Yeah.
Things change radically. The body, the posturing, the activities, the sorts of things that they do, it's completely different. Women ruin male-only spaces.
Absolutely. They even one of the things with Boy Scouts, I happen to have almost all male leaders, but you could have female leaders. And it's a lot of the Christian alternatives to scouting that have cropped up. The problem with them is they're actually still too politically correct.
yeah.
They still have mother leaders involved in the Boy Scout thing. And women won't understand this. It actually hurts their feelings a lot of time to hear this kind of thing. But women, you actually need to go away sometimes. And you need to make sure that your boys and your husband and men have male-only spaces and don't ruin them by showing up or trying to be included.
It's amazing how bonding is different. My wife even says this because I've said in years past, I said, hey, do you want to go hunting with me and the boys? She's like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
You guys need space where you can, the dynamics is just so much different. By the way, a sad correction. I looked this up while we were talking.
Oh, no. Is it?
Augusta is.
They caved.
Yeah,
See,
so
another one falls.
they've been admitting, this one is from 2017. They've been admitting like Condoleezza Rice, other power women.
Condoleezza Rice?
Yes.
Power women? Oh, man.
Power. The pantsuit wearing demographic. Get out of here.
You ugly.
That's
Couldn't have
just-
said it
that
better
just-
myself.
That's what it
Nigerian
is.
camera guy. I can't remember what his name is.
So we agree that men need male-only spaces. One of the other ones tied, again, very closely to this, I said men lack a meaningful agon. So again, this is why I think you have things like Fight Club. Why was it so popular? Basically because you have immature boys finding destructive, narcissistic ways to try to pursue masculinity in a world where there is no space for that.
Yeah.
I do think that there was a lot to learn from something like Fight Club. What's the attraction? Again, it tends to be a very Absalom type space. But as Anthony Esselin has pointed out, men learn best in the context of an adventure or a fight or an agon. But we're not allowed to have those.
No.
Our words are violence. Violence is toxically masculine. We need to put those things to death. James Cameron said that testosterone
are gay. What? Are you gay?
You are gay. James Cameron said that testosterone itself needs to be banished.
Well, it's being banished.
I think they're pretty successful.
Yeah.
But Dan, just briefly, why do men need a combat zone for ideas and their bodies?
Yeah, I think there's a certain safetyism that comes with mothering. I mean, it's kind of built
It's a
into
feature, yeah.
mothering. It's a verb. There's action there, meaning like, hey, nice, be safe, be careful, don't do that, don't climb there, don't do this. You know, the other day I was looking for taekwondo or jujitsu gym for my boys. I've got 4 boys. They fight constantly. I mean, it's just like, that's what boys do. And I was like, well, I mean, at least I should train them how to, take a punch and to deliver a punch. But all of these gyms are like co-ed.
Yeah, they're co-ed.
So they're going to have to fight girls.
That was the problem we
like,
ran into as well.
Yeah, like, no, you do not fight girls. Anyway.
Yeah.
The point is that men need this because they need male-only spaces and boys need male-only spaces because, like we talked about earlier, they're dangerous. It's a design feature.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually a good thing to have a dangerous man pointed at the right enemy. It's a really good thing. But if you have the feminine instinct, which is the feminine is a very important part of family, society, life. But if you have that feminine instinct of safetyism and protection and nurturing, it kills the thing. It kills the thing. How can you learn how to be a dangerous man that is potent in, like winning the girl, in taking dominion, in being strong? If you have someone over your shoulder constantly saying, no, too dangerous. No, too risky. Don't do that. Don't climb that. Don't lift that. You could get hurt. You could do this. You could do that.
Yeah.
Like always at the forefront of your mind, there's risk there.
Yep.
Red alert. Don't go any further. There's risk. Whereas the masculine should say, heck yeah, there's risk.
Yeah.
Let's do it. What if we lose? Then we lose with honor.
Yeah. And the problem is there is no such thing as a safe man. A soft man is the most dangerous man of all.
Yeah.
He can destroy a whole world. So it's not as if you're going to declaw men. If you declaw men, you make them more dangerous. Because then they give way. They stop fighting. They stop building. They stop cultivating. They stop doing the things that men obsessively were made to do. Even things like inventing. The greatest artists and inventors are men historically, and it's not an accident.
No.
It's because they were meant to aggressively throw themselves into things in a way that builds worlds. And when you cut their testicles off, and you do it by removing all of their places of struggle and removing all the male influence and removing all of the fathers, and you just give them mothers of both sexes, then what you end up doing is you actually make the most dangerous man of all, the fat, soft, low T loser.
And
who's passive.
I also think, like we've talked about the physical, but it also ties into intellectual. Brian, you've talked a lot about how it's such an awkward thing, like when there's ladies on Twitter like arguing.
Oh yeah.
And you know, Beth Moore is the master of actually detonating a whole conversation with a very manipulative feminist approach, right? Because when a woman enters and says, "Oh no, these mean boys are being mean to me," well, it changes where you're no longer able to have this intellectual fight.
Can't do combat.
No, it's an interesting quote. Esalen says this: "The whole of rational life, as John Milton conceives it, is an agon, an adventure, and a fight. We must fight because it is for us men of the essence of virtue itself, whether physical or intellectual. So for us to progress as men, we need these spaces to fight."
If courage is the testing point of every virtue, and it is, and you remove all situations or you attempt to build a world where courage will no longer be needed, you're actually eliminating virtue itself. Virtues no longer have the possibility of being tempered by heat. It's like all you can get is low-grade steel for the rest of forever, because you're never going to get men who actually know how to take a punch intellectually and verbally and relationally, and men will have to in the world that exists right now. I mean, men will have to. If you take it away, it's not that they're not going to do anything. It's that they're going to build a hellscape. They're going to build a bureaucratic mothering hellscape. Like, they're just going to ruin everything in churches and society and families. They're going to give way to the feminine everywhere, and the feminine will become a monster. So, like, when you lose the masculine, the feminine also becomes this she-beast hydra that destroys everything. She-beast, you know? So it's very difficult to overstate how important it is that men and boys get this time and these spaces, and that we create them and recover them.
Yeah, the importance of fighting in the masculine is hugely important. I remember when I was in grade school, I had I caught an interception at recess and returned it for a touchdown, and I was doing some sort of celebration dance, right? One of the kids made fun of me, punched him right in the face, right in the nose. And the thing is, he was stronger than me. And after I did that, I was like, oh no, what is he going to do? You know what happened? We became best friends.
He was like, yeah, I deserve that.
Yeah. So, but I guarantee you, like, two girls fight, guess what? The feud is on for life. Even to this day, my wife talks about fights she had with this other lady that, anyway,
this
has
is
the
how
same name.
baby names get taken off the table.
Yes,
no,
it
we
is.
can't name her Cindy. I knew a Cindy in 3rd grade. She was a real
piece of work.
Piece of work is what I was. She was bad.
Yes, that's what you were looking for.
She was mean.
She was mean.
She was a witchy lady.
She was witchy. There you go. That's how. And every husband who's tried to name a daughter knows this.
You absolutely know.
You've proposed a name and found out that there was a feud somewhere that has
and it's
taken
still
that name.
continuing to this day.
You're like, I'm sure she grew out of whatever happened in 3rd grade.
She's fine.
She's probably fine.
Actually, she's probably not.
Are you on
Just
Cindy's
the odds
side now?
The odds
No.
Cindy, we're sorry.
Cindy, I'm so sorry.
Gentlemen, I want to close. We've got 2 points. We're going to devote other episodes to these, so we don't have to go too in-depth here, but I think worth mentioning signs of fatherlessness. And the first one would be the sexual chaos, largely stemming from the sexual revolution, post-1960s, all that good stuff. But when you think about things like immodesty, right? I was watching I think it was a football game. It was a Michigan football game. And they were getting absolutely destroyed by TCU. And they were showing, like, the quarterback's sister. And she's in the crowd, and she's got, like, a tube top and Daisy Dukes. And her dad is standing right there. And I'm just cringing and going to change the channel as they keep zooming in on them. And one of my sons said, "Why does that father do nothing?" And it really struck me because I was thinking, wow, that's actually I think the key point here. Why is dad standing there watching her dress like that and not saying anything? So, Brian, agree, disagree? It seems like a lot of the sexual chaos that we're facing is fathers who didn't do what God did in the garden, which is no, more clothes.
Yep. Protect, nurture, love, pour into, not leave this gaping void of affection that needs to be sought by every man. Not teaching daughters that they have this temptation before them always to try and manipulate and seek their validation.
Wanting attention.
By sexual attention, to be lusted after by 1,000 men instead of faithful to one man. And this is all father hunger. Even I think if you pushed back and said, what about mothers? And we're not doing a season on motherhood, so it's like, but even the motherhood is designed to sort of nest under the covering of fatherhood. So a lot of the issues you see with daughters, you also see with men who would not correct their wives. And so now the wives are discipling the daughters to be hoes. You literally see this, where they're taking them out, they're teaching them to be obsessed and vain with their appearance, to where, oh, it's fine, she looks great. Let her, this is the fashion now, honey. You just don't understand. I mean, sexual chaos is the result of unself-controlled men who give way.
Yeah, you have fathers that are supposed to show their daughters that they're actually a treasure.
Yeah,
there's something to be sought after. They're
veiled,
valuable,
guarded.
Glory of man,
and therefore a treasure must be protected.
Yeah,
it must be protected. You're valuable enough that you must be protected instead of just displayed like on a football screen in front of millions of people.
I've had to have this conversation already with one of my little ladies because she's very feminine. She is an absolute queenlet, as I call her. And I've had to tell her because she was frustrated with Mama one day about why Mama wouldn't let her wear some clothing without a dress. Like you can't wear these pants, this legging things without it had dress come down your knees. And I had to take her aside because she was real little lady, real frustrated with Mama. And I'm like, Mama's loving you right now. She's protecting you because and not because you're shameful, but because you're glorious. Like you are a treasure, you're a crown. And I just think of how many little girls grow up where they don't have any of that. Nobody's telling them that they're just like nobody's telling a young man, you're strong. Your strength matters. You're supposed to be dangerous. You're supposed to have ambition. You're supposed to love the Lord and your people and go do hard things.
Don't punch your sister.
Yeah, don't punch your sister. No, now they're telling him go to the jiu-jitsu gym and punch another person's sister. But no one's telling the young ladies that they are a glory and that glory is supposed to be a gift and a crown.
Yeah, their value is it's funny because no little girl that's grown up in the last 30 years has doubted their value.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you rock, girl,
Yeah.
Whatever, you can do anything,
go,
whatever.
girl.
But it's a misplaced value.
Yeah.
Because it's not just for any passing guy. Like
No.
you are too valuable
Yeah.
to be displayed this way. And so there's that lack of affection from fathers to daughters that have shown like this is what right affection looks like towards a daughter. But the same thing could be said about a son in directing him as far as promiscuity goes. Mm-hmm. Instead of just saying like, hey, like do whatever feels good sort of thing, get whatever you want. Instead it should be like, hey, you're potent. Mm-hmm. You are dangerous. And you can raise a line of children, of sons and daughters to your own glory and the glory of God. And that's a dangerous thing. Make sure that you choose wisely the woman that you're going to select. Don't settle. Don't just go out and sow your wild oats and all that.
Yeah. Yep. Be a glory.
Yeah, the last thing to say about that is homosexuality. I wonder if one of you would talk just a little bit about that, but it really makes fatherhood obsolete. For the obvious reason, you can't multiply.
I mean, yeah, you can even see this in some relationships where there'll be like a much older guy who's groomed a younger man, which is, I mean, this whole subject is absolutely revolting and disgusting. But this is a common thing that you see is like an older guy and a younger guy, and you have like father issues on display for like, I mean, it's the almost the most obvious. Just
Mister. Should I call you Mister?
I said so.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's such a twisted. The reason it's so disgusting is because it's so twisted and inverse of the good and beautiful things that God has given to us as gifts in marriage and in sex and in affections, and it's so unbelievably twisted and revolting.
Yeah, yeah. Homosexuality is essentially it's the enlarging of male lust to like a supernova, just eat the whole universe, eat the whole solar system of masculinity. Homosexual relationships are often extremely promiscuous and extremely sexual. I mean, like the number of partners, because what you get is you're taking two male libidos and just pointing them at each other in a really disgusting and perverse way. And so you end up with instead of this beautiful creational design where you have a glory that cannot be without the coming together of the man and the woman, which is world building and life giving, you have this death cult. It's a death cult. It's another way of seeing that those who hate wisdom love death because it's impotent. It cannot produce. It's fruitless. It can only rob and steal and kill and destroy and pervert, and it gets poop all over everything.
The best stories are the best. I want to just fly by that as quick as I can.
I'm not even kidding.
I know
it
you
puts
talk
poop
about.
all
I
over.
mean, thank you, Thabiti.
I mean that
for
as a-
recovering your gag reflex and all
I mean that both as a literal fact and a metaphorical fact. It puts poop on everything. Yeah, it's a good question.
So I mean, like the archetypal story is the knight who fights the dragon to win the girl. Like the whole driver of society
Yeah.
and virtue and everything is like, I will do this glorious thing.
Yeah.
And again, I can go back to the group of teenage boys that are standing around. All of a sudden, they're like pushing each other. You know, when the pretty girl walks by, or like you're lifting weights and you're like, I'm gonna lift way too much
more,
weight, but I'm going to try and I'm going to show off.
Yeah.
You know, it's the driver of human society.
I'm
And
going to
instead
carry
it just
so
becomes,
many chairs.
it becomes your supernova thing, although really dorky, is a really good picture because it just implodes in itself and it just swallows and it will take an entire people with it because that's what homosexuality does is it defiles a people, not just a person.
It's late stage sexual perversion on a societal level. It just shows like you're in the late stage of empire. The late stage of decadence and complete lack of restraint, where that which is even the women are giving up the natural use and burning with lust for one another. I mean, it's just like it is the evidence that you have rejected wisdom wholly.
Yeah, it's essentially like the death throes of a culture, I think. Dan, I want to close with something that you put on our list, which I thought was phenomenal, which is that fatherlessness produces risk-averse drones, corporatism, statism, that sort of thing. We can close with this one, but what did you have in mind? I thought it was a fantastic point.
Yeah, because men don't have that family crest and that family motto, like I talked about. They'll inherit anything that a father corporation or statist government will give to them. And they almost interact with organizations like they would a family line and family legacy. I've seen this before. There's a man who has he's a boomer. He worked for a company his whole life, and he wants to be buried at the company grounds.
What?
Like the family plot. I'm not joking. Like,
Weird.
he wants to be planted, put in the ground at this factory because that's how he relates to this organization. Is almost like, this is my father. My whole mission in life has been to make this company successful. And that's an extreme example. But what it really reveals is that so many men don't have a family motto or a crest. I don't either, but I'm
I'm going to make
discovering
one after this conversation. I'm going to make one. I think my family motto is just going to be full send.
Full send.
that'll probably age well. I'll just say that. And so you can see like how people now relate to government and to work and to career and to a lot of other things very strangely like a father. And so the expectations from those things, especially the government, almost becomes like a father being benevolent to its children.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you can't pay for college? A good father would help you with your education. Daddy government will be a good father, and I will pay for some of your student loans.
Yep.
We could use tons of examples about that. Like, hey, you're getting up in age, and a good father passes on an inheritance. So here is a social welfare or social security program. I will take care of you. Enter into my loving embrace. And it sounds kind of like over the top, but that is exactly what has happened. Is that you have a political ideology, a government or a corporation or some dream that you have that you end up relating to as a father. And it just shows that there's an aimless people that has no purpose. And so it's been co-opted by statist government
Mm-hmm.
and by corporate America.
Really interesting teaser for the next episode that we'll do. But it's interesting to note that the black fatherlessness rate, which is so high now, pre-1960s welfare, there was actually less fatherlessness in the black community than in the white.
Wow.
So it hasn't always been the case, but it's that transfer, Dan, of you went from fathers to Papa government.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was an intentional move.
Yeah, even government workers, you can see that a lot of the times. I mean, we have a lot of government people here that are definitely like, awake to this sort of thing. But you can see the standard trope of a government worker, like a road crew, like there's 6 guys leaning on shovels. Daddy will take care of me.
Yeah, when you don't actually have to you don't have to go into the agon and work. You don't have to compete because you have the government has a monopoly on the use of force, and so it can force people to pay taxes. It can print money whenever it wants, and so it's your job is safe as long as it can keep stealing from people. 40% tax rate, whatever, you're good. So you don't have to go in the agon. You don't have to fight and win. The top 5% do to go up the ladder and get to these high positions, and there are good leaders and good men in these jobs. But the general structure of the thing is directly conducive to anti-masculinity, not masculine virtue.
Yeah, great points. Gentlemen, it's been a wonderful time having a conversation about fatherlessness in America. Looking forward to part 2 next week. We're going to be talking some of the root causes. So we talked about diagnosis, symptoms, but then we'll get into next week some of the root causes. And, I think that'll be another enlightening conversation.
Yes.
So, Brian, would you close us down? I'm going to have you close
Absolutely.
us down. But before you do, just tell us a little bit about New Christendom Press.
Yeah.
And what people can be looking forward to.
Yeah, New Christendom Press is an endeavor that we are all working together to attempt to build a publishing house, a modern multimedia publishing house that can create resources that are in the vein of theology with calluses, as Dan says, theology with practical anchor points that you can hook onto that will actually move the needle in your life, to show you the good and the true and the beautiful in every part of what it means to be human. And so we're hard at work here in Ogden, aiming to build that, writing books, getting authors that we think are going to be helpful to you, like C.R. Wiley, writing a book on some of what we talked about today even. Expect to continue to see high-quality podcasts, some new projects launching here in 2023 on that front, and also a conference. And so if you'd like to support us or learn more about that, sign up for our interest list for the conference in 2023, you can go to newchristendompress.com and help us make this thing get off the ground with a bang. And we hope it serves you. That's really our aim, is that it would serve you and that this would be an unbought Christian publishing house that could just start the right fires and build the right things.
Yeah, and you can also support the King's Hall at Patreon. And if you're curious, we have had quite a few after-hours shows that are not publicly released. They're just for our patrons. So over the break, we were still busy producing content on the after-hours. And if you're curious, we have quite a few episodes on the generational divide between the boomers, millennials, and our hopes for Gen Z, for the Zoomers, that based generation that's coming up.
Yeah. We have a chat group full of some wonderful gentlemen through the Patreon as well. So check that out. There's a lot of great rewards, and also you help make this show possible. I know a lot of podcasts say that, but it's true. Eric works full-time for New Christendom Press. I work part-time. We all work part-time for New Christendom Press. Like, this is actually something that we're aiming to put our blood and sweat and tears and strength into, and we can't do that without you guys. We literally can't. So we appreciate your support everywhere that you guys have been giving it. And in the meantime, remember, Winkit Quisa Winkit. He conquers who conquers himself. Start there, and we'll see you next time on the King's Hall.